And we're here.
Yeah, we are. Well, we're in the future for what you're about to listen to.
Greetings from the world of tomorrow.
I wish we were actually in the future.
Can we just skip to next year?
Few years in the future, that would be nice. No, so we did our first ever live recording, our first ever live podcast show.
Not live for you guys. You guys are watching like the ghosts of our past at this point. It's all very meta.
Yeah, there's a lot of playing with time going on. Yeah, you are about to hear our first ever live recording that we did at the Granger Leadership Academy.
Now say, what might that mean?
Oh, thanks for that segue, Bo. So the Granger Leadership Academy is an intergenerational leadership training and organizing conference. It's been going on for a number of years, usually in person, but this year, like everyone, they pivoted to a virtual conference, and they were nice enough to invite us to attend, not just attend, but also do a recording of our podcast. And yeah, the Granger Leadership Academy uses a thing called fan activism to mobilize people, which is basically like all the nerds who are really excited about, books and movies and comic books and TV shows, bringing them together with their enthusiasm for what they're fans of and their creativity, and using all of their, skills that they have as fans organizing online to then organize towards real world issues, and working with each other to learn about some of those issues. And yeah, I've been going to the Granger Leadership Academy for a long time. It's hosted by my former employer, disclosure, that employer being the Harry Potter Alliance, and their deal is basically just an expansion of what I just explained about the Granger Leadership Academy. But I did think, and Bo, I think you agree, since I just brought up Harry Potter, for anyone who is not familiar with the Harry Potter Alliance and is about to be like, oh, Harry Potter,
man.
Isn't that author been like real problematic lately? Do you endorse her?
Come on, folks. We can actually enjoy things without necessarily having to endorse the beliefs of any jackass who made cool things at some point.
That's true. I thought you were about to say, we can't enjoy things anymore. It's 2020.
No, it's 2020, so we have to enjoy the things that we have.
Yeah, and I think also it's 2020, and so we are going to acknowledge the problematic things in things that we enjoy. We are going to, interrogate our biases and the biases in any other things and people that we engage with.
Right. I think, I just want to throw in something real quick here, that it's not necessarily the same thing as separating the art from the author. Like, you don't necessarily have to pretend that the art exists without the person who was involved in its creation, but rather it's critiquing the context. It's critiquing the situation that brought it up about, and the after effects that we've seen that have happened since then. So when you look at something like Harry Potter, it's possible for us to grow up with this thing and to learn valuable lessons and still be able to look at the creator and be like, did you read these when you wrote them?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I just pulled up a quote that I saw on Twitter a little bit ago from another podcast called The Gaily Prophet. Some queer folks who do a Harry Potter-ish podcast, right?
This is me as the guy who's always kind of new to podcasts, so I always have to like riff on whenever there's a particularly well-named one.
Yeah. So the Gaily Prophet podcast said on Twitter, "We're not separating the art from the artist. We're holding the artist accountable while giving ourselves permission to keep loving something she made."
That's fantastic. That's very well said.
They kind of go on with a lot of practical tips, so I would look up their Twitter. If you are someone who was a Harry Potter fan, wants to see how you can continue engaging or just taking action even if you don't continue to engage with the Harry Potter series.
Yeah. And if you do continue to engage, I saw something that really meant a lot to me. And it was another tweet, because of course everything's a tweet right now. But I can't remember who said it, but it was "We are Book 8."
Oh yeah, that's a Harry Potter Alliance thing.
Is it really?
Well, I'm not sure if the Harry Potter Alliance came up with it, but we sold a lot of merch that said it for a long time there.
It just makes so much sense. You get 7 books and it impacts your life in some way. And this really kind of like ties into the idea of fan activism in a sense as a whole, is you take the things that you learned from that storytelling experience and figure out a way to make them, to actualize them, and figure out, what is it about you that is going to represent these things in a way that could be even better than the context in which the thing was created.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, and that is totally the spirit of the Harry Potter Alliance and of the Granger Leadership Academy. And I wanted to, spend all this time sort of talking to you about the Granger Leadership Academy. One, because that's where we were when we recorded this podcast, so I wanted to give you all some context when you listen to it of, why we're talking about what we're talking about and who the audience was. We knew we would eventually be releasing this to everyone else as well, but, that's who we were talking to in the moment. But also, in case it sounds interesting for any of you who might want to attend in the future, because usually it is an annual event, but they're actually doing another one in October, which by the time we get this episode out will probably be very shortly in the future. But in mid-October, they're doing one called Fall into Democracy, and so it is specifically themed around electoral politics and mobilizing to get out the vote and all that kind of thing. So if you are at all interested in that, we'll put some links in the show notes to get more involved with the Granger Leadership Academy, maybe attend their Fall into Democracy edition, which we will not both be in attendance. We won't be doing another recording at that conference, but I have been invited to host a panel on pumpkins. I'm gonna talk about the history of pumpkins, and there's gonna be a jack-o'-lantern contest that I will judge, all virtually. I swear rest of the conference is serious and like about mobilizing and getting out the vote and stuff, but in the way that I think one of the good things, Bo, you were kind of hinting at this, like one of the great things about fan activism is acknowledging like the joy that we need to have right now. These are really tough times, and it requires a lot of very serious work, and we can't ignore problems, but we also have to find those moments of lightness and those moments of joy. And so I guess that's what I'm bringing with the pumpkins to GLA in the fall.
Exactly. And these are things that we've seen in the things that we love, while hunting Horcruxes and evading, the Death Eaters, they still danced at the campsite. And when Tony Stark has to figure out how to keep some random, tech terrorist from murdering everyone that he loves, he's going to still crack some jokes, and he's going to like have a good time figuring out how to turn a hot rod into a suit of armor. So, we can find joy in these moments while also being mobilized by the things that have inspired us in the past.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I love anything that brings in a good Tony Stark reference.
Exactly. We don't want to let Harry Potter, enjoy all the bandwidth. But yeah, so that's really exciting that there's going to be another iteration of that for this year. So again, as Jack said, look for the details in the show notes. And come on, it's a pumpkin. Like talking about pumpkins, like what else do you want from Jack the Pumpkin King? But that's a good segue. The fact that we did this all virtually, which by the way, do we ever confirm? Were we the first all-male panel there? Were we breaking new ground?
I should have gone back and confirmed it. We do talk about this a bit in the episode, but yeah, so the Granger Leadership Academy, I think in their FAQ on the website, they used to say something to the effect of like, no, it is not just for women or girls, but expect a lot of girl power. It is a very feminist and very like women and non-binary heavy audience. And there have been men, trans men and cis men, and plenty of non-binary people who have populated panels and been speakers. There have been some individual men speakers, but I'm pretty sure we were the first all-male panel at the Granger Leadership Academy.
So there's probably a joke or two about that, but the most important thing to kind of highlight is that this was a virtual conference and it was going on live. So we actually had a chat, and occasionally you're going to hear us respond to the chat and bring up sight. We did this on video, so we actually used a couple of visuals, and there is some description of them. But if you're listening to the audio only version, you can always, and you wanted to see them actually, you can always go and check out the version of this that's going to be living on our YouTube channel.
Yes, and that is... Do we have a URL for that? Wow, I should know this. But there's a link in the show notes. I mean, the YouTube channel is called Everything's Bigger.
Yeah, just search for Everything's Bigger. We managed to hit the nail on the head. It's search engine optimized, my guys.
It sure is. I have hosted, in 2020, I have hosted a lot of podcasts under a lot of different names, and many of them were not super searchable, and it is such a relief when I go to look up Everything's Bigger, and it's just the only result.
Boom, there we go. We owned that. And so I think that's a good way to bring us to the fact that we've already talked about how we're speaking to you from the future. We're kind of always speaking to you from the future in a sense.
We're
right?
kind of always speaking to them from the past by the time they listen.
Time is rubbery. It has the consistency of melted cheese. Nothing means anything anymore. The days have all bled into one. Time is meaningless. It's also a flat circle. But to take a break from kind of the joking tone that I normally have, I do want to acknowledge specifically when it was recorded, not only because it's at this point dated to a degree, but because we were talking about current events at that point. So I don't think that we really introduce them as much as we talked about this thing that's going on. So we're going to be talking about a lot of the protest activity in the wake of George Floyd's murder, which is of course something that we're still talking about today. We're going to be talking about things that were going on in Portland with unmarked, unagencyed law enforcement picking people up off the street and shoving them into unmarked vans. But we're just kind of I just want to make note of the fact that there's a couple of events that at that point were current that are just going to get kind of shoved at you. And it's just an indicator that this was recorded back in July.
Yeah. And I think that's, we were talking before we started recording of just how, as you said, time is melted cheese right now. But I know when I went back and was editing these, I was hit with a little bit of a shock of just oh my gosh, I didn't forget obviously some of these bigger things that had happened, but I just I guess I forgot how raw some of it still felt. And yeah, I don't know. There's just so much that's been hitting us every single day of 2020. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know, just a little forewarning so you don't have as much of oh gosh. And again, a reminder that this was recorded a few months ago. Yeah,
and it was that was the pressing thing at the time, and we just kind of slid into it without really introducing any of the stuff as really setting it up. Mm-hmm. But yeah, without further ado, in that case, why don't we rewind way, way, way back in time to revisit the Granger Leadership Academy?
Yes, I gotta go 3 times this year.
And with that, what do you think? Do you wanna get this show on the road?
Should we get started? We should have queued up the music. I just realized.
I thought about how we would do that, but I figured that would be just an enormous amount of moving pieces. I can kind of do it. Okay, whatever. I can't do that.
Yeah, I was gonna say you were the first line, and I can't do the fake music as well as you can. So.
And in 3, 2. Hello and welcome to Everything's Bigger,
a podcast about masculinity for dudes of all genders who ask why.
And here we are at Camp GLA, the Granger Leadership Academy. So it's very appropriate for me to make this comparison. We like to think that masculinity is a little bit like, I don't know, what's a famous example of that? Hermione's bag. On the outside, it looks like any other regular purse that somebody might be walking down the street with. Maybe it's something that you've seen a million times before. You don't really call attention to it. You don't really pay attention to it. But with this particular bag, when you look closer, you realize that it's not just a regular purse about yay big, but it contains a dimension inside, a pocket dimension. It contains multitudes. Anything that you want to find and a lot of things that you don't want to find can be found within this bag. And appropriate for the baggage symbology here, it comes with baggage.
Oh! Well, on that note, I'm Jackson Bird.
And I'm Bo Méndez.
And today we are discussing how the patriarchy doesn't want you to care about things. Just doesn't want you to, whether we're talking fandom, we're talking activism, we're talking public health and safety, perhaps. The patriarchy is one of the things putting us down. But before we dive into the total main topic, we always take a little time at the top to just chat a little, which we did so much housekeeping for GLA. It feels like we've already done that. But one thing that we wanted to bring up relative to GLA before we dive into our main discussion is, and I haven't completely fact-checked this, but I have been to every GLA, and I believe that we have the distinct honor of being the first all-male panel at GLA.
Finally, somebody gave a platform to the men.
Right? Oh, fine. I will say there have been a lot of singular, keynote speakers or singular workshop hosts that have been men. But yeah, I think this is the first, which is hilarious. I love that about GLA, that it's taken, 6 years to have an all-male panel where there are so many conferences that somehow don't understand not to have all-male panels. They're like, what? Other people, white men are the only ones who exist. What do you mean?
Clearly. Yeah. I deal with that in academia a whole lot where it's kind of oh, wait, hold on. This will be the
15th panel of like a bunch of white dudes. But I think that's a testament to, you know, the values of the HPA and the GLA project is just like trying to give center stage to voices who haven't necessarily been heard from all the time, and should be heard from more often. And I think that, you know, by virtue of us being the first all male panel, you know, it's our responsibility to really unpack what, again, I'm going to keep on using that word, folks, and hopefully I do know what that means.
Unpack?
Yeah, unlike Vizzini in Princess Bride, Wallace Shawn's character. I think I do know what that word means.
Inconceivable.
Exactly, but hopefully we can continue to unpack what it means to, like, you know, be masculine people who have the kind of like dichotomy of a tendency to steal all the oxygen from the room, and also a responsibility of that privilege. How can we use that privilege to kind of erode that power structure?
Yeah, raise up other voices and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you were talking about academia. It reminded me of, I've seen a lot being said, I think specifically on the science side of academia, that a lot of the research coming out about COVID-19 and stuff right now is all coming, or not all, but like very, in a much larger majority than usual, coming from male scientists. And part of that is because a lot of the women scientists are having to take care of more stuff at home. Even though everyone is home, of course, it ends up on the women. And we're literally seeing the effects of that, of what research is coming out and who it's coming from. And we got a lot of problems to fix in this world.
That's so strange.
Yeah, I know, it is really strange. I mean, and this is something that I feel like you and I will need to continue to confront and address throughout our lives, of like, I feel like even a lot of the very feminist and progressive men that I know, when you kind of look a little bit more into their lives, like if they are married to a woman and like they have kids or something, they think that they are doing an equal share of the work, but then turns out if they really interrogate it, it's like, ooh, actually they're not.
Oh, dude, that's been happening to me, like personally, without getting too much into detail. But just like everything else in the world right now, this whole situation is kind of like laid bare a lot of structural issues, but it's also given individuals a lot more time to reflect. And I've been able to like be much more aware of, you know, the slack that I need to pick up in just like how I maneuver in the world, and also even like my own interpersonal relationships with other individuals in my life. And so it's a very interesting time. It's an unprecedented time. It's a time where everything feels heavy, but it's also been a time for me to do some of that reflection and hopefully be like just more aware of where I've been kind of defaulting to some of these like deeply ingrained social norms that are inherently unjust and unequal.
Yeah, well, and I think that might be a good segue to get into our main topic, because the first thing that we wanted to talk about was just like, what is the patriarchy? Because that is a loaded term that gets thrown around a lot. We throw it around a lot, sometimes more seriously than others. But, you know, being here at the Granger Leadership Academy, I'm sure a lot of folks listening, a lot of our alumni are very familiar with that concept. But Granger Leadership Academy is a intergenerational open space for, you know, new activists and first-time activists, and it's a learning space. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. Also, because I think it's always helpful for us to be working from a common definition when we're having conversations.
Yeah. So I'm going to put forth something, and you can feel free to interject and like let me know if there's something that I'm, you know, maybe not touching on that I should be touching on. But going back to what we were talking about earlier about like not being experts, the one thing that I do feel like I have a little bit of like training in is that my undergrad is in anthropology. So for 4 years, I read and studied and did ethnographic research on just like, how does culture work? Why do people?
People.
It's like, why is humans? So
Bo got his master's in why is humans?
Yeah. And so I think that gave me at least a little bit of a lens to look at this thing that we call the patriarchy. And like, I have it down in my notes, but this is capital T, the capital P patriarchy. Right. You know, the word patriarch, it refers to someone who is a male leader, much like monarch or matriarch, which is a female leader. And there are lots
Wait, does this mean that all non-binary people are monarchs? because we got the matriarch and the patriarch, and so they are royalty. That is my new interpretation.
As an anthropologist, I sign off on this.
Cool. All right.
No, but it's actually funny when we even talk about these words, we see that binary reinforced in even how we talk about the words, which is another symbol of like, sometimes we have to like, you got to break language a little bit in order to make it work a little bit better. Like when you work out, what you're doing is actually tearing your muscles so that when they heal from that tear, they're significantly stronger. We got to do it with language. But anyway, to continue unpacking that word, like there are plenty of instances where patriarchy, lowercase p, applies to life. A patriarch in a family is typically the oldest male family member and is something of an elder figure to look toward. I'm thinking I just watched Knives Out recently, and like Harlan Thrombey.
How many times have you watched that movie now?
I don't know, 15. It's a great movie. Everyone should watch it. Christopher Plummer is a patriarch of that family, and it doesn't necessarily have the assigned baggage of capital T, capital P, the patriarchy, to be a patriarch of the family. Likewise, we also have different cultural outlines, different cultural organizations where you might have something that is patrilineal or patriarchal or matrilineal or matriarchal, and that kind of determines like how property is passed down through, from generation to generation, or whose responsibilities are to do blankety blank. And we have examples from different cultures that are matriarchal and are matrilineal. But when we talk about capital T, capital P, patriarchy, at least for me, I tend to think of the kinds of values that have been imposed over time, usually stemming from a Western European colonialist tradition that have called for things like a reliance on the traditional nuclear family, a strict adherence to gender norms, a lot of degree of supremacy of people who can be identified as white, coming from the Western European descent. And these are the things that we kind of like see as, because European colonialism has touched so many places around the world, and especially here in the United States, that's kind of where we got so much of our, foundational bedrock, politically and socially speaking. You can see the bones of capital T, capital P patriarchy all throughout American society. And that's the thing that has caused us to have structural racism. The fact that we have essentially built entire economic and political and social systems off the fact that at some point, and in many ways still to this day, people who were different colors were considered lesser than, other than, different than, and how that kind of perpetuates that inequality. Same thing applies to that strict adherence to gender norms. When talking about the patriarchy, a lot of times it relies on the strict gender binary, and it relies on very specific roles that people who fit into either male or female, again, adhering to that binary, what they can and can't do in society. So when we talk about unpacking the patriarchy, we're talking about that. We're talking about this like deeply entrenched system that has kind of, in some ways or another, extended its tendrils and tentacles into every facet of your life, and has continued to perpetuate oppression. I like to think that throughout history, there have been very few instances of closed room meetings where a bunch of European descended men have met up and been like, okay, how can we screw over everybody else? The more you flirt and the closer you get to the concepts of like cabals and conspiracy, the further away you get from the truth, I think. But I do think
that's a great point.
Yeah, I do think that even without these kinds of like closed door meetings or something like that, there has been a history, and we can see the evidence of that in how our founding documents have written, who weighed in, who was left out, and how different loopholes have been explored throughout time to allow the continuation of oppression. I'm talking about, as soon as you pass the 13th Amendment that says slavery is outlawed except for as punishment of a crime, you see the imposition of Black codes and Jim Crow laws that make it a whole lot easier to charge people of color with crimes and therefore continue a kind of sanitized version of slavery through mass incarceration. So that is all to say, this patriarchy stuff is complicated.
Yeah, it super is. And I think, you brought up a lot of good points there. I think one, that distinction of, it's not that there's a bunch of, like powerful men in a closed door room being like, here's how we are going to conduct the world as puppet masters. Rather, it is a structural system that has grown and grown over time. And like you said, the tendrils have kind of gotten into every part of our lives. And so I think, a lot of our conversation today is we want to talk about specifically how those powers and what have turned into, in some ways, like cultural norms, how they have affected us and a lot of other people in our expressions of caring about things, in standing up for things, in fighting for certain things, because a big part of that patriarchy is having a very certain idea of what type of person should be in power, and not allowing any person who looks or acts different than that to be in power, and often oppressing people who are different.
Yeah.
And we're talking about this all in a very like high level, like very serious way. I feel like one of the examples I wanted to bring up is not quite as serious as that. We're going to get real again. But one thing I kind of wanted to compare it to, and I will definitely want your assistance in like connecting the dots here. But I think a lot as a fan coming from this fan activist world, but even just like fandom and fan community when it doesn't have the activism, we get made fun of for caring about something that we like so much, which I always think is funny that we could get made fun of for like wanting to cosplay or like, speak up about these things that we like so much, when you got people going to sports stadiums dressed up as their favorite athletes, literally wearing their jerseys. It's like, okay, so there are clearly things you're allowed to be a fan of in very fanish ways and things that you're not. And we sort of have different interpretations of like what the stereotype of a fan is that would be judged by, but coming more from the Harry Potter world and a lot of the like the Tumblr world and stuff, and like seeing a lot of like boy bands and K-pop, like I feel like when people denigrate fans, they're sort of often using the stereotype of like teenage girls and denigrating them in a way to be like, oh well, teenage girls like aren't serious about anything, and here's the proof, because they like love this boy band so much, whether it's BTS or the freaking Beatles, because this has been going on forever, and just sort of like putting them down and discounting them, in part because of their age, in part because of their gender, in part because they are enthusiastic and excited about something. And I feel like there's like the common narratives like you shouldn't care, and yeah, I don't know what is your take on that?
I mean, I think you've kind of hit it on the head, and this is something that I still experience a lot in like talking about the fact that I'm a big like superhero movie nerd. And keep in mind, I say superhero movie. I like comic books, but I haven't read that many comics. And so you think about like, what's the disconnect between even within sub levels of fandom, that somehow because I've sat through and enjoyed 22 MCU movies since 2008, that I'm somehow less of a fan than someone who's been reading Iron Man comics since 1983 or something like that. There's a desire to, take something seriously without taking it seriously. Like, don't be vocal about the fact that you're excited about it. You have to treat fandom like a job or something like that. And I think I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but I
was thinking more of like the outsiders who are making fun of fans for caring.
sorry. But I think that that kind of level of toxicity is present when viewing things from the outside looking in. I've seen like memes talking about millennials and that sort of stuff. Like, how can you take a millennial seriously because they won't shut up about what their Hogwarts house is or something like that? And It's like, what's wrong with that? For a lot of us, that was a very pivotal moment in our growth, and that became something that, it's kind of like taking those the Myers-Briggs tests. And I know there's a lot of overlap between like online versions and whatnot that tell you what your house is, but like, what's wrong with being proud of the fact that you're a Hufflepuff or something like that, or being proud of the fact that maybe you saw a Spider-Man movie when you were 13 and you heard the, with great power comes great responsibility quote, and you've decided to ingrain that into how you take on your life. Next thing you know, 17 years down the line, you're a professional in some kind of, professional setting, and you have the power and the responsibility to advocate for a coworker, to support a project that might make a lasting difference or something like that. And because of the way that this thing that we call the patriarchy has kind of infiltrated other things, it wants to shout it down and be like, no, you can't take inspiration from that. That's just kid stuff.
Yeah, I think, we're talking a lot in sort of larger, slightly like philosophical terms and like culturally about like the patriarchy. But I think one of the ways that you and I got on this topic when we were thinking about it is because we have both felt this, like from particularly from fellow men, that like we're not allowed to express how much we care about something, whether it is Spider-Man or Harry Potter or issues that we care very much about.
Mm-hmm.
There's just sort of this idea of like, it's almost like, oh, if you care about this, like you're weak, or like, oh, you shouldn't like ruffle feathers. And sort of going back to what I was saying, like the patriarchy wants to uphold what to them is the only good version of like what should be in power, and so anything threatening that is like a threat to their very idea of what like good and the top is.
Yeah, it's the status quo, and and when you see something that kind of goes against that, or rather when the patriarchy itself sees something that goes against that, the first reaction is to try and dismiss it and to try and make it highlight the fact that it is somehow going against one of those norms. When you see it in a masculine space, it's like, dude, men, come on, bro. Men don't get excited about that. You get super judged for being excited. I mean, for particular things, but also the level of enthusiasm. Yeah. And I kind of want to call out, just because it's near and dear to me, and we have it in the notes, a particular example. And that's this past week, we lost Grant and Mahara from Mythbusters, who I grew up watching Mythbusters. And since we've gone into isolation, I've been rewatching a bunch of Mythbusters because it helps me get through. And I just want to highlight Grant as an example of not that. Grant, and to an extent, the whole Mythbusters team represents what people do when they are unabashedly excited about something and they feel like that enthusiasm is welcome. They get excited when they get to build a new project. They get excited when they have a new question to test. They get excited when the experiment goes right and they turn out to be right. They get excited when the experiment goes terribly, disastrously wrong. Because no matter how it goes, they're still learning something. And that's like, of course, that's the whole point of the show, is to learn something. But I think that is an example of like, kind of something that's counter to this this knee-jerk reaction to try and stifle enthusiasm, is to just be like super unabashedly enthusiastic about something, and to show how like, this I think stretches into fandom, where people can see something that, on paper it's a work of fiction or it's a TV show, it's not real, but it's symbolically so much more significant. I'm thinking about like, let's see, and I hate to even bring this guy up. I don't like him, but he's loud, so I see a lot of his stuff. When Black Panther came out, Ben Shapiro was very quick to be like, hey, everybody who's super excited about Black Panther, quick reminder that Wakanda's not real. It's like, who cares?
Yeah. Since when was that? Like, you just want to say, I don't know, Hamlet, not real. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, wait.
Yeah. The fact remained, though, was that it was a groundbreaking production that was not only entertaining, but also symbolically very important. And so
meant a heck of a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah. And when you think about like what is or what isn't real, like, you get into the whole mess of like social constructs. Like, someone's talking about like, well, it's just a social construct. It's not real. It's like democracy is a social construct. Social constructs are flexible because
time is a social construct. Money.
They're flexible because people are the ones that influence them. We dream them up, so we get to shape them, but it doesn't make them any less real because of the impact that they can have on
them. Exactly. Because we have this discussion a lot with like gender as a social construct, because like, it very much is. That doesn't mean that its impacts aren't very, very real. We see that in the way that like, women are subjugated into certain roles. We see that in the way from a trans perspective of how like certain things matter a heck of a lot to me in terms of gender. If being a social construct meant that something didn't matter and didn't have real impacts, then like that would be very confusing as a trans person. I'd be like, then why do I feel so strongly about needing these changes? It's so, social constructs, super real. Sorry, I went on a tangent there. You say social construct near me, and I just like, must talk on this.
This whole show is like 15 tangents in a trench coat. It's okay.
Yeah, 15 tangents in a trench coat. I like it.
But that just goes to show that, like, you know, when you talk about fandom and this thing that people will shout down as being like, it's for kids, it's for teenage girls, to use your example, it's not real. It is real for the people for whom it meant something. And this kind of brings me back to an example that we wrote down here about, I was at a show for a band called Rise Against, who were like super big when I was in high school. They're not big now, but it's been a little while since I've been quite as excited about them. But I remember seeing them for the very first time, and they're, you know, punk hardcore band or hardcore influence band. Anybody who's super up about genres, please don't get at me about that. Their singer Tim took a minute in between songs to, like, of course, every musician does this. They thank people for being in the crowd. But because they're a very politically active and politically vocal band, they thanked everybody for coming to the show, because the fact that they were there meant that they cared. Just even showing up to a punk show on a Thursday night or whatever meant that, you know, you weren't just there to buy merch and to hear your favorite songs. You were there because the music means something to you. And that is applicable across so many different walks of fandom. When you show up to a con, when we can do those things, when you
we're at one right now.
Yeah, exactly. When you cosplay, when you interact with you know the source material, whether it's literature or TV or whatever, in a way that not only celebrates but sometimes necessarily critiques it, that means that is important to you. And that same, you know, bring that same energy. You can apply that to everything else that's important to you. So your fandom can very much be, and for me, a lot of times it was, when it came to music, when it came to kind of like the moral values that were instilled in me by superhero movies and that sort of stuff that I grew up with. I say grew up with as if I haven't been watching all the MCU movies over the past couple of weeks.
I watched Avengers last night.
Gosh. Those sorts of things, you know, they can be your jumping off point for how you act in the world at large, because you see an example, and maybe that example is somebody whose model that you want to follow, or maybe that example is, you know, for the first time seeing someone who looks like you or has a similar experience as you, and you say, if they can do it, I can do it. And next thing you know, you're building a set of electromechanical armor and flying around. I don't know. That hasn't happened yet, to my knowledge. But you know,
soon. I do often watch any of the Iron Man and like, oh, why didn't I go into mechanical engineering? It could be so cool.
Dude,
so cool.
I did try to go into chemical engineering for because of Iron Man. The whole scene where he's like, add some gold use the titanium gold alloy because it's resistant to frosting or whatever. I was like, yes, that will be my career. And then I found out that I couldn't do math. So
yeah, looks like I think our camp counselor Catherine highlighted this comment for us all to see on the screen from Tara, saying the stories may be fake, but their impacts aren't. Yes, right there, that's exactly
right there.
I remember for a while at the HPA, we really tried to resist phrases like real life, like IRL. We would say IRL, but like in real life, like we didn't like referring to internet online communications as being any less real than in-person communications. And I've been coming up against that language challenge again now that we are all sort of in quarantine and a lot more is virtual, and a lot of people are, you know, differentiating their lives as much as us who spend as much time online always have been. And I'm really frustrated that Apple decided to call their video conferencing thing FaceTime, because I feel like I just always want to tell people like, oh yeah, I just, you know, like need some FaceTime with you. But now they think that means that I want to do the opposite and that I want to video call them. I'm so frustrated by that. Because I feel like FaceTime or in person are good alternatives to saying like in real life, because this is real life. We are in real life right now. That's kind of tangential from the like story fiction thing, but it's another thing that's always bothered me. But anyway, we were talking, oh no, go ahead.
Go.
I was just gonna sort of move us along as we were talking about, you know, things that we care about, but also like let's talk about like the activist side of caring about things and the ways in which you know, the patriarchy and many men writ large will try to stifle that and put us down for it.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about that a whole lot, and especially since we kind of did the legwork a minute ago of unpacking the patriarchy to a degree. I think that
Wait, I just have to cut in real quick. Unpacking the Patriarchy reminds me of Dylan Marin, former GLA keynote speaker, had a YouTube series for a while where he would unbox like larger philosophical terms. I'm pretty sure he has a video unboxing the patriarchy. So everyone go search it on YouTube later. It's amazing.
It's like that.
But anyway, yes, we unpacked.
Well, I'm thinking about the Tumblr meme now that goes around of Anubis doing soul unboxings.
Oh my gosh, I have not seen that, but that sounds amazing.
In Egyptian mythology, when you die, Anubis weighs your heart, which is the sum of all your actions and deeds, against a feather. And if your heart is heavier than the feather, your soul is devoured for all eternity. And so, like, the meme is, all right, what's up? It's your boy Anubis doing another soul unboxing. You can see this one right here. It's a little bit heavier than a feather, which longtime watchers will know that's bad news.
Rin, in a comment that just got put on the screen for us, maybe better to say the stories are fictional than fake. Any story gets viewed through a variety of lenses, even especially nonfiction, and then it cuts off for us. But yeah, fictional. Let's use genre-specific language.
Yes, that's a very good point. If I said something was fake, I was talking about wrestling, because nobody has strong feelings about that.
No one does. No, but anyways, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You were talking about unpacking the patriarchy,
right? Yeah. So as we've been unpacking the patriarchy, I've come to kind of think of it. This iteration of it, this overarching iteration that we talk about, and how it's influenced, specifically for me at least, American culture, because that's my biggest experience. It's very concerned with the status quo, and the status quo being, things being as they are. So what we see a lot as challenges to people when they're kind of like finding themselves as activists is they have to kind of like swim upstream against this idea of the status quo. That's going to be incarnated in the people that will try and dismiss your concern by saying like, everything's fine the way it is. It's always been that way. It's always going to be that way. What matters, and this is again where it becomes very, very American, because there's a huge focus in the American imaginary on rugged individualism and the individual action. It's going to be like, everything's going to be fine as long as you work real hard, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And then we see the toxic masculine version of this coming in and saying like, everything's fine as it is. Real men just deal with it.
Yeah. Which in there, I think there's an inherent refusal to acknowledge that things aren't fine, which we can take on that individual level of needing to be better in touch with your emotions, maybe, and dig a little deep, but on a societal and cultural level of not acknowledging that just because things might be okay and fine for you doesn't mean they are for everyone else, and that we have some deep structural issues of oppression and inequality that need to be addressed.
Right. And these are the things that will show up when, and a lot of the stuff that I'm thinking of is kind of anecdotal. And that's because, again, I haven't sat down to write my dissertation on this or something like that yet. So I don't have a whole bunch of like article-based stuff to peer-reviewed stuff to back it up. But we've all had these experiences where, someone who is concerned with an issue of inequality or wants to take up a cause will voice their concern about that thing, and someone will say like, "Oh, dude, you're being too sensitive about this. Everyone's so easily offended these days." And that's when you end up with, people are misusing the word trigger. Mm-hmm. They are accusing you of being a snowflake, mm-hmm. and all of that stuff. It represents a certain degree of just like people not seeing things from your perspective. But in between the lines, that's the patriarchy at work. That's people doing the patriarchy's work for it, of saying, things are fine as they are, leave them be. Mm-hmm. And I think I have a couple of examples here. If we can, do we want to go ahead and
go for it?
The little slidey slides. I suppose a content warning might be appropriate here, because so I've collected a couple of just like visual things, very short, that will be they deal with stuff like police brutality and violence, especially as experienced by people of color. So
they're mostly ones that we wholly disagree with, right?
Yeah, that's actually the point. Everything is. Yeah. So here, this is something that I've seen shared multiple times on Facebook, and I got an appropriately low res version of the image because I feel like it's never a good image. So sorry if it's a little bit grainy. But what you're seeing here is this is a common response to people who are maybe organizing to to draw attention to issues of police brutality. And it says the real problem isn't police brutality. The real problem is now we have an entire generation of spoiled, entitled brats who believe rules and laws don't apply to them, and parents who refuse to be parents and hold their kids accountable for their behavior.
Hold their little kiddos accountable for their behavior, as it says.
Which I find ironic because like the whole issue with police brutality is that there's not enough accountability. And here's a, kind of low res generic meme being like, oh, well, you're not holding your kids accountable. But again, kind of reading between the lines here, this is something that says this thing that you say is a problem is not actually a problem. You are the problem. And I think that it's really interesting. And in many ways, this can be one of those things that can stifle somebody's attempts at trying to have a tough conversation with an individual or trying to get involved in a larger organizational effort against a particular cause. If somebody says like the problem doesn't actually exist, the problem is that you care too much about the problem, or the problem is that you won't take responsibility for things, it's not really going to support you.
Yeah, and this one in particular is also, calling organized activists who, I mean, a lot of them are young because young people lead movements. So a lot of them are adults. It doesn't matter what your age is. You can be serious and organized, and saying, oh, you're just spoiled brats. Yeah. You're little kids who are doing this. And so it's the Facebook meme version of nah, 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 nah.
And it actually kind of ties into that kind of like teenage thing that you were talking about earlier. Somehow caring about things is diminished and it's viewed and diminutive. Only kids care. And it's like, no, look at history. Yes, a lot of these movements are intergenerational and kids play a very important role, but these are things that affect everybody across the spectrum of age.
Yeah, I think teenagers tend to be very, very passionate about things because they're figuring a lot of things out. And that's why they end up leading these movements and like pushing us to do what we should have done before they got there.
Yeah. For me, still, like one of my most powerful experiences in a group action was I was 18 and I was walking around Boston and I just happened to stumble upon a group of people doing a silent protest against the war in Iraq. And I didn't really know anything. I wasn't expecting it. I was living in Texas at the time. I can't remember why I was in Boston, but I was. And I just I learned a little bit about it. I joined in. And it was amazing to be there as this like 17-year-old, 18-year-old with a bunch of people who I think were college students and maybe a few of them college faculty, just walking through Boston Common, silently holding candles. And that goes to show that like, it's not childish to care. Not
at all. All right. Hit us with another one that's going to make us more angry.
Yeah. Well, here you go. This is how a role that the media can play. And I say the media loosely. I actually hate that term because media is itself a plural. So there is no one media. It's a wide variety of perspectives. And this is from TMZ. So like I've cited so far a Facebook meme and TMZ, neither of which are necessarily reputable sources. But these
that's kind of the point.
Yeah, these are the things that will weed their way into discourse as if they were be all end alls. So when talking about the tragic case of George Floyd, when you see clearly an instance of racialized violence against somebody, there will be a media package ready to be cited by detractors to say, well, he was on a whole bunch of drugs, and somehow paint him as responsible for his own demise. That is something that we see often, especially in discussions of police brutality. If you weren't doing anything illegal, then nothing would have happened. Oh, they're no angel. And that is another example of this kind of deeply ingrained mindset of the law is already working. There's no need to question the law. When the proof is in the pudding here that things are disproportionately handed out when it comes to justice. Some people will see a lot of just treatment, whereas other people will see very little of it. And here, I'm going to get...
No, I was just going to say it's despicable. Yeah, and also time check. We're going to move on to questions in just a couple of minutes. So you can, if you haven't already, we'll sort of scroll through in a minute, but go ahead and feel free to put in questions. And they can also just be kind of comments to respond to or whatever.
Yeah, I won't spend too much time on this one, but this is again Shapiro, the guy that I always go to when I need something.
You spend too much time in the dark parts of the internet.
I do.
We got to get you follow some GLA attendees and put some joy on your timeline.
I follow those folks too, and it honestly is keeping me sane. I feel like there's a need to see what's going on in those darker parts so that you can have an idea of what you're up against, and that's why I kind of did this. So this is actually a retweet of Andy Ngo from, I think, I can't remember what he founded.
Axios?
Yeah, I think so. But we've heard reports of these unidentified, kind of like generic federal authorities pulling protesters off of streets in Portland, shoving them into unmarked vans and driving away. And anybody hearing that would be like, what the hell? But here we see people kind of praising it for being quick, like, oh, thank you, you've made my oppression convenient and expedient, which I think is just another way that idea that things are functioning fine as they are, there's no need for you to be questioning the system or trying to change the system, that sort of discourse enters the attempts at seeking a greater sense of justice. And I'll go ahead and stop the screen sharing because you're right, I've been kind of hogging the mic.
No, you have not been hogging the mic at all. I just wanted to make sure that we have time for questions. But before we do, I mean, let's kind of wrap up some of our thoughts on that, because that's kind of heavy.
Well, I have one thought, and this will kind of like wrap up some of my closing stuff, is that when, again, capital P patriarchy, because it is so invested in its own survival and its own perpetuation, it will consistently try to convince you that what you're asking for in terms of basic human rights is too much.
Yep.
And that is sort of what we're up against. And so I don't really know what else I have to say about that, other than that it's really important to remember that basic decency, the right to exist, is not too much. It's the bare minimum, in fact, that you can be asking for. And in terms of how you can accomplish that, we've been seeing, I want to say unprecedented, but it's definitely very precedented in history. Social movements calling for greater racial justice. We've seen, again, because the whole structure of everything in America has been laid bare by COVID-19, people calling for greater health access to healthcare, greater economic equality, because of how much the economy is ground to a halt. And it's a daunting time, but at the same time, it's a very motivating time for a young activist, an activist who has never considered themselves an activist but wants to be involved, somebody who this stuff has never touched, and all of a sudden it's touching them, and they realize how big of a problem it is. The daunting thing can be like, well, what can I do? And this is kind of a mantra that it's not really a mantra because it's not nice. It's not, cleanly laid out, but it's something that I've been repeating myself to kind of remind myself. It's that nothing that you do will ever be enough, but doing something is better than doing nothing. And there's a million ways to do something. I think it helps to stifle the savior narratives that we've seen, even in some of the things that we do admire. No one's going to write in and save the day as an individual, but through the collective action of many individuals. And maybe it's protesting in the streets, maybe it's writing a letter, maybe it's calling your representatives, maybe it's donating to a worthy cause. Through all those collective actions, you can accomplish so much. Yeah. And everyone can do a little bit of that lift.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of as part of our discussion in the opening panel this morning. Sean and Riley were kind of talking about, there's no wrong way to be an activist. There was a great post going around Instagram or just the internet when the protests were starting that had kind of like a D&D board or something. And it was like, everyone has a different role to play. And there's like someone is like the healer, and like they can be the one who's like providing snacks and medical care and like the things that people who are protesting need. And there are the people who are going to go protest on the front lines. And then you got people who are the storytellers, and then you got the people who might be like the guy in the chair, the Spider-Man reference, who's like helping out, which is what Riley said she was doing. Like she's on Google Maps, like putting pins in where there's cop blockades because she can't go to the protest. But Sean was also talking about, and I think this kind of ties together what we were talking about earlier about whether we're caring about issues and activism or we're caring about fandom, the ways that those go together in a fan activist way. And Sean was saying he thinks it's so cool that that with fan activism you can infuse some joy into your action. A lot of activism is tough and it's heavy and it's a lot of work and it's often like hitting you right to your core, and there's a lot of emotional labor that you're doing, and it's very, very hard. So the times when you can bring a little bit of joy into it, whether that's from self-care or from your support network or from doing things in a little bit of maybe a fun way in a fan activist lens, I think that's super, super important. And like those are all things that don't come as like second nature to a lot of us, because we have grown up in this heavily patriarchal society where we're taught that like all those things like, oh, we shouldn't care about them, you know, they make you weak or whatever. But I think those are the things that will help sustain us, and that will bring us some of that hope and get us through. But
I think
go ahead.
I just want to say, I think it's a really important point, and that kind of ties back to like any sentence that begins with "it's just a blank" is there to kind of undercut that feeling. But you know, I'm thinking back to my Rise Against example. It was great to hear the singer thank us all for being there because it meant that we cared, but we were also there for a concert. Right. So like, I think that the joy is really important. And that's something that sometimes I struggle with. Like I think that I've lost a little bit of a sight of that, but it's great to see that in these different fan communities that, yeah, your activism can be and should be joyful, because if what's that? I can't remember who said this, but it's like, if there's a revolution without dancing, I want no part of it. Like, you know, what's the point of waging these fights and calling for greater equality if it's not to make the world a better place for us to just live and get to be happy in the world?
Yeah. No, I love that. So we got a couple of minutes for questions, because we do have one more segment of what we always end with that we're going to do after questions. But I'm just scrolling through right now and seeing a lot of great discussion going on in the comments. I think I saw Mary Grace at one point said 15 tangents in a trench coat would be some great podcast merch. So, might have to do that at one point. Tren was also saying that on first read they thought that Spoiled Entitled Brats was talking about the police officers, and everyone's like, yep, yeah, that's what it should be. That is more accurate take on that.
I saw some pictures of the kind of like rent-a-feds that have been being deployed in Oregon, and the looks on their faces, and I'm sorry for painting with a broad brush, but they look like they're ready to go violate some rights. And I think it's really interesting to see what our relationship with these authorities that are meant to protect us are.
Yeah. Mary Grace said, boomers always forget that they're the ones who raised us millennials to be so confident, outspoken, and self-assured. Don't complain when we stand up against injustice because you raised us to do that. Which is such a good point. They always make fun of us for like the participation trophies. It's like, you gave those to us. We didn't ask for them. Go ahead.
It's also interesting to think about that now in the wake of Lewis. Why am I forgetting if his
Representative
name is John or Joe? Terrible. John, thank you.
You're name with John Lewis, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In the wake of his passing, you know, like he talked a lot about good trouble, and like, you know, marching across the bridge in Selma, he pardon my phrase, he got his ass kicked. He got his skull fractured, and he got arrested, and he got roughed up. But for him, that was part of what it took to draw attention to the inherent inequalities in the system and to eventually erode those inequalities to the extent that he did. So yeah, like that generation, people from that generation and the one afterward probably raised us with this idea that sometimes in order to make the system work, you have to go against the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of on the note of kind of, you know, intergenerational tension between one another, I had something that I pulled up that I didn't quite get to, but there's this thing that started happening last year where, people will make fun of like political cartoons and comics that like boomers share all around Facebook and stuff that they think are really funny. And especially like younger millennials and Gen Z are just like, that is like not funny at all, because especially Gen Z just has this very high level, complex form of humor that's like layered in so many forms of irony, and it's very awesome. And so they'll see some like older humor and just be like, this isn't funny. But also a lot of times, a lot of those cartoons were, kind of misogynist, pretty sexist. Just, you know, they'd make jokes like it'd be like the man being like, oh yeah, what are like ball and chain jokes, you know, that like, oh, you get married and it's like prison and you know, all that kind of stuff. And so there was this trend that started last year where people started adding extra panels to these comics. And So if it was maybe like a father-son where like the dad is, making fun of the kid because they spend all their time on their iPhone or whatever, or on, their Xbox, then they would add an extra panel where the dad says something to the extent of like, oh, well, you know what? It's a little bit my fault that like I haven't shared my experiences with you so that we can bond together. And then the kid will be like, thanks, Dad. I really appreciate these moments when we can like be honest with each other. And like, I look forward to learning this with you, and so they're just like adding these extra panels to sort of like heal from both sides and have some apology and understanding from both sides. And they also do it on the sexist wife ones as well. So it's real great. But anyway, that's just what Mary Grace reminded me of. So we're going to go ahead and move on to, we got 3 minutes left. So we're going to actually be on time for this. We always end the show with a segment called Just the Tip, which is like just the tip of the iceberg. We were saying at the beginning is our logo for the show is the iceberg. So while we have our main topic that we talk about, we also like to give each other 1 minute each to go off and vent about something that's really been eating away at us today or this week. And a part of this is, trying to encourage healthy masculinity of getting in touch with our emotions. So we're allowed to be happy, we're allowed to be sad, we're allowed to be angry in this moment, but just for this 1 minute. We can't get too out of control here as men. We only get 1 minute to express our emotions. So Bo, do you want to go first and I can time you?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I had a whole thing prepared, and now I can't remember any of it. So we're winging it. That's the whole point. It's supposed to be winged.
Yeah,
winged.
Whatever. All right, you ready?
Yeah,
3,
sure.
2, 1, go.
Woo, buddy. All right. So I definitely wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of cancel culture because I feel like that's been in the thought bubble for a lot, and this is important because I do spend a whole lot of time in like the shitty part of Twitter. Oh, sorry, the bad part of Twitter. I just want to draw attention to the fact that like there are 2 sides to this that I wanted to highlight. Number one, there is to a degree a certain amount of cancel culture, and that's in the fact that sometimes people will enter into something that they're not familiar with and they have to grow into it. They have to learn. And I do worry that sometimes we don't give enough space for learning. So as new activists enter into spaces with more seasoned activists, let's remember to always be more eager to educate people than to cast them out. But on the larger thing, when we talk about things like deplatforming, there's a difference between being canceled and being critiqued. Critique is what we need. We need people in power, with power to spread ideas, to know that we are watching them, to know that we are interacting with their ideas, and when necessary, we're dismantling them when those ideas are proven to be harmful.
I guess that was important to finish saying. Oh man, we got a question. Maybe I'll try to use, I don't know if I can use my time for the question. Oh, what?
Let me know when you're ready to go.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Should I answer? I'll just try to answer the question. Let's do that.
All right. And you're on in 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, so we got a question from a Ravenclaw who asked, any tips, thoughts on how to participate in fights for racial justice without taking up too much space / using our presence in the most helpful way? I think that's a great question, and it's a really tough question anytime you're trying to be an ally. And I think the biggest thing to know is to make sure that you are not trying to take over a conversation, make sure you're not trying to lead, make sure you have done your own research privately, so that you have listened, you have learned, you really know what the cause is. If you are going out in a on-the-ground space, if you're going to a protest, make sure you're never leading. Don't try to instigate anything. Like, listen to the organizers, who hopefully should be, in this case, organizers of color, Black organizers. Don't try to start your own thing. If you are trying to raise awareness, maybe online or something, elevate other voices. Think about how, if you have a larger platform, can you be inviting, Black activists or organizers onto your platform to speak so that you're not using up that. The biggest thing is listen, be ready to mess up because you're going to mess up. Be okay with that and use it as an opportunity to learn and grow.
Yes. Whoa! Nailed it.
It was good timing.
Okay.
All right. Cool. Thank you so much for that question.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that, and thanks for your answer and seating. Basically, do that. Jack just ceded his own time to talk about whatever his thing was to try and boost this other issue.
We'll never know what my other topic was. We are over time, so we got to start wrapping up. But say your thing, and then we will.
Well, I just want to give you props. That was the smoothest, just the tip segment we've ever done. So Jack was at 1 minute. Normally it's a little over. But yeah. this has been great. I just want to thank everybody for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine, our camp counselor. Thank you to everyone watching and listening. Thank you to GLA for inviting us.
And thank you all for being here. Thank you, HPA, for putting this on. Thank you to our participants. Thank you to the other panelists that are going to be on the other stuff. Thanks to Jack for sharing this time with me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this time with me, Bill.
To the future of activism.
Yeah.